Daily news and analysis. We keep you informed and inspired.
This is World Today.
Hello and welcome to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. Coming up, China and the United States agree to work towards a relationship of constructive strategic stability. We will talk to a senior official at World Trade Centers Association on China-US commercial ties. India is hosting a BRICS foreign ministers meeting amid continued Iran conflict. In the United States, Kevin Warsh wins Senate confirmation as the next Fed chair. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on our previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching World Today. First up, Chinese President Xi Jinping says China and the United States have agreed to work towards building a bilateral relationship of constructive strategic stability. The Chinese leader made remarks while holding talks with his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump in Beijing. Xi Jinping said he expects 2026 to be a historic landmark year that opens up a new chapter in China-U.S. ties. He said China-U.S. economic ties are mutually beneficial and win-win in nature. He also emphasized that safeguarding peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait is the biggest common denominator between the two countries. President Trump highlighted the significance of the meeting. The U.S. leader described the presence of the high-level American business delegation he has brought with him as a gesture of respect towards China and its leader, saying they look forward to trade and doing business. He added that the relationship between China and the United States will be better than ever before. The two leaders also discussed the issues including the Middle East, Ukraine, and the Korean Peninsula. President Xi Jinping later met with the U.S. business delegation, encouraging them to strengthen mutually beneficial cooperation. The two leaders then visited the Temple of Heaven. So joining us now on the line is Professor Qu Bo, Director of the Institute of International Relations, China Foreign Affairs University. So thank you very much for joining us today, Professor Qu Bo. First of all, what is your understanding of this very new definition of a constructive China-U.S. relationship of strategic stability?
Yes, and I think this provides a new orientation of China and the U.S. relations. And I think the key is about strategic stability. According to the news press, the presidency really highlights the constructive, strategic, stable relationship should be positive stability and really highlighting cooperation. And also, both countries should regulate our competition and manage our differences. This stability and should be enduring stability anchored in prospects for peace. So I think this new orientation is consistent with our so-called the new type of major country relationship, or the right way of making two countries get along well. So that always reflects our consistent idea. So when we define that is a constructive relation, that means it should be positive and cooperative. Both countries should help each other to succeed.
In your observation, Professor Qu, will 2026 become a historic landmark year, opening up a new chapter for China-U.S. ties? Why or why not?
Yes, and I believe so, especially the last year when the President Trump came into power. And especially from April, he started a new round of trade war, not just with China, but with the world, other countries of the world. The last October, presidency met with President Trump and reached trade deal for a year. And I think before two leaders meeting, the delegation on trade issue already negotiate and bargaining in show. And just like presidency mentioned, the Sino-U.S. Trade relation or economic and trade relation in nature is mutual beneficial cooperation. And the last day, the president mentioned the trade delegation already reached a general balance and a positive outcome. And I think this already set a very solid foundation for the economic issues. And I think both countries will build a mechanism to manage the trade and economic differences. So I think this will lay a very solid foundation for bilateral relations. And secondly, when we look at about political and strategic differences, so I think the Taiwan question may be the very, very key issue in terms of the strategic and the political regards. And I think especially the United States already realize the Taiwan question is the very core national interest for China. They have to deal the Taiwan question very cautiously.
So, exactly talking more about the Taiwan question, do you agree with this point by the Chinese leadership that safeguarding peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait is actually in the common interests of China and the United States? And by the way, do you think President Donald Trump, by making this visit to China, will gain a better understanding of China's position on the Taiwan question?
Yes, I believe the Taiwan question is definitely is our common interest. Just like President Xi emphasized during the meeting, that the Taiwan question is the most important issues in China and the U.S. relations. And from our side, and actually Taiwan question is our internal affair and relates to our sovereignty, right? So it's kind of like the United States already, in terms of the bilateral relations, when we're talking about the Taiwan question, and actually that is the United States is interfering our domestic affairs. So I think just like President Xi mentioned, if both countries, especially the United States, could probably handle the Taiwan question, it will keep bilateral relations generally stable. If mismanage it, it will lead to confrontation and even conflict between the two countries, pushing China-US relation to an extremely dangerous situation. So I think now the Taiwan independence is incompatible with cross-Taiwan Strait peace. So in very plain language, so the Taiwan independence and actually implies the conflicts of a war. The conflict of war is now consistent with the both countries' interest. So that is why we say they maintain the peace and the stability across the Taiwan Strait is the common interest between two countries.
What is your main takeaway if we take a look at the list of the business delegation that President Donald Trump is bringing with him this time? Are they a reminder that a huge space actually still exists for win-win or mutually beneficial cooperation between the United States and China?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the trade and economic relations between two countries in nature is mutually beneficial one. Very roughly, we can divide this trade, the business delegation into three categories. So the first category, like the CEO of Apple, Tesla, and Boeing, right? So they are big manufacturing companies. They need Chinese market for their products. So even the first term of Donald Trump and the second term of Donald Trump, so for these manufacturing companies, now very influenced by the tariff war evoked by the United States, right? So this is the first category. So, but also influenced by the trade dispute between two countries. And the second is from the financial sectors. So we look at the CEO from of Blackstone, from Wall Street, Schwarzman, Mr. Schwarzman. I think for him, he has a very strong belief, even in terms of the financial sector and other sectors, the U.S. business still need the Chinese market and need the Chinese capital, right? The third category is like the high-tech industry, especially the semiconductor sector, and especially, for example, like Anvida CEO Jensen Huang. And I think it's kind of a little bit, this is the most challenging aspect. And we know the US, especially during Joe Biden administration, they have implemented so-called small yards
Yeah.
and high fence policy, try to constrain Chinese companies to access the US high tech, right? So, but even now, and I think this time, the semiconductor company CEO came to China, also saw, even in terms of the high tech sector, that both countries still need to still have a lot of room for cooperation. And in nature is also the win-win cooperation or could mutual beneficial from the cooperation.
How do you think the United States and China can avoid the Thucydides trap, which President Xi Jinping said during his meeting with his U.S. counterpart, represents a major question facing the two sides?
Yeah, and I think definitely the both countries have wisdom to transpass or avoid the toxicity trap. And we know Professor Graham Allison, the person who coined the term toxicity trap, also believe both countries, China and the United States, could avoid the toxicity trap. So when we look at the logic of toxicity trap, that is really reflects a very deep, realistic mindset and based on the European great powers computation. They believe the international system is an anarchic one, and all countries struggle for security in this self-help system. And the military force is the only effective way to define yourself, the security and the survival. So for them, the great powers, like another very realistic scholar, and he wrote a book, it's called The Tragedy of Great Power. So they believe the competition among great powers is inevitable. And I think this logic or this argument is mainly based on the Western history, especially based on from the 17th century, 18th century. But now we know the world already changed. The colonialism already disappeared. And I think China and the United States really have the wisdom to deal the relationship and to build a new relationship, new type of relationship among major countries.
Talking about the Temple of Heaven, we know during the Ming Dynasty and the Qing Dynasty in China's ancient history, the temple was where ancient emperors performed rituals wishing for good harvests and favorable weather, for example. What do you make of the symbolic meaning of the two top leaders visiting that site together?
So yes, and I think the Temple of Heaven is one of the China's most revered sacred sites. And the building was built is to worship heaven, pray for good harvest, and maintain a cosmic harmony. So I think the key philosophy, the Chinese philosophy reflected in Temple of Heaven is harmony between heaven and humanity, so-called 天人合一. And at its heart, the Temple of Heaven is the physical embodiment of ancient Chinese cosmology, the belief that heaven, earth, and humanity are interconnected, interdependent, yeah, and inherently harmonious. So this, especially the harmony, is very key concept in the Chinese core philosophy. So I think when the two leaders, and especially when the President Trump visited the Heaven Temple, and he can feel that philosophy in the physical existence, right? The architecture there, and he can directly feel the Chinese people's thoughts, try to pursue the harmony between heaven and humanity. And especially, I think presidency show him the prayer, the hall of prayer for good harvest. And I think that is a stunning circular triple eave structure, right? So that is also reflects the Chinese philosophy. Is the everything is circular, and we could cooperate with each other. So I hope Donald Trump could understand the Chinese ancient philosophy much more better. And when he visiting this very Chinese ancient architecture there.
Thank you very much for joining us. Professor Qu Bo, Director of the Institute of International Relations, China Foreign Affairs University. You're listening to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. A senior executive with the World Trade Centers Association says despite the ongoing trade tensions, competition between China and the United States continues to drive innovation and benefit consumers. In an exclusive interview with my colleague Song Ruixing, Scott Wang, who is the Vice President of the World Trade Centers Association for Asia-Pacific region, called for a more balanced, inclusive, and sustainable form of globalization.
Scott, as WTCA Vice President, you work closely with businesses moving goods, capital, and investment across the Pacific. Can you share some of the latest trends you've observed in U.S.-China trade and the broader global business environment?
Well, thank you for this opportunity, first of all. We were actually truly honored to have Ambassador Xie attended our 2026 WTCA Global Business Forum in Philadelphia. He also delivered a keynote speech at our opening ceremony. So we got, I think, about 500 delegates from 50 countries. And everybody was very grateful to learning from his perspective, U.S.-China relationship, in particular in the field of trade and economic relations, which has been, I think, one of the cornerstone for the U.S.-China bilateral relations. While the relationship has gone slow ups and downs in the past decades, as you know, just as the situation among with other major trading partners, Ambassador Xie emphasized the prospect and potential of future cooperation between the two largest economies in the world, which is not only critical for both countries, but also for the rest of the world.
So, despite all the political tension, business still has to operate in the real world, which makes Trump's visit especially important for a commercial standpoint. Then, when U.S. President visits China, headlines may focus on trade and technology, but from the business community's perspective, what is the single most important outcome that companies need from this visit?
As an organization, as WTCA, we put a tremendous emphasis on people-to-people connections. So we understand the importance of these high-level in-person dialogues and discussions. We hope the summit can be fruitful for both countries and the rest of the world. President Trump is taking quite a few high-profile business executives with him for the trip. Each of them might come with very different business objectives. Same situation for the Chinese business community. The U.S. delegation is going to meet this time. However, I believe everybody is looking for an additional layer of stability and predictability, which is essential for cross-border investment and trade. For business, because business uncertainty means risk. And we have seen the impact on business community in the past years, that it's very much a challenge for company to deal with the uncertainty. And also we have observed how much the business community benefit from the stability. We hope that the upcoming summit can further extend the agreement with each other and also pave the way for the future dialogue between the two countries.
You mentioned what companies are hoping to see from this visit, but beyond short-term outcomes, there is also a bigger question about whether meaningful cooperation is still possible in some key industries. I've noticed that at the recent WTCA Global Business Forum in Philadelphia, Chinese Ambassador Xie Feng used Tesla and Chinese EV companies as an example of racing to the top, healthy competition that benefits everyone. But in sectors like semiconductors, AI, and biotech, the trend today is toward let's say, separation rather than collaboration. In your observation, is the Tesla model replicable, or was that a unique moment that has already passed?
I think we very much appreciated the term of healthy competition Ambassador Xie presented with the case of Tesla and the Chinese EV companies. Actually, it very much coincide with the business principles, which are fair and free trade, open market, and healthy competition. We also fully aware of some of the ongoing challenges in their bilateral trade relations, notably the export control measures both sides imposed on certain technology fields, including the industries you just mentioned. Competition could be a very good thing for innovation and business progress, as we all see between the Tesla and Chinese EV companies that delivered great products for consumers, right? And we certainly hope that more healthy competition can happen between industries and countries and companies. However, we should also recognize that there is no single model which can define the complexity of trade relations between the two largest economies in the world. Instead, we should, I think, focus more on the big pictures. That the U.S. is still the largest country trading partner for China, and the trade and economic relationship between the two countries are way bigger than these restricted areas. We see iPhones, Starbucks, McDonald's, KFCs are still extremely popular in China. We also see a lot of Chinese brands and products are very popular in the United States. So this is something that I think we should focus on, that the two countries has a lot of more area that they cooperate, and they should continue to collaborate moving forward.
Right. Economic ties may be under pressure, but we are seeing renewed cultural curiosity between the United States and China, from social media trends to what some jokingly call pickleball diplomacy. Does that kind of cultural interest eventually translate into business relationships and investment, or are the commercial and political environments now too disconnected?
Yes, I noticed the trend that you just mentioned, and some of the popular social media terms, such as, for example, China Maxing. I think the human society is essentially it's an ecosystem in which all aspects are interrelated and linked to each other, right? And among them, people-to-people relation is very much the foundation of everything. Right? In business world, we talk about connections and communications. These are essentially the people-to-people thing. From organization like WTCA, people-to-people, because we're member-based, people-to-people relationship is always the cornerstone of our network. One of the favorite things we always say is that we know people who know people, right? So absolutely, any improvement in people-to-people relations will eventually, I think, improve the public policy, including trade policy. As a result, we appreciate the commitment of Chinese leadership to further opening up. Personally, I like a term from WTO called globalization, which means that we're moving towards a new version of globalization, that it is more balanced between efficiency and resilience, more inclusive for wealth distribution between the global north and the south, as well as social classes within countries, and more sustainable in terms of environment and work-life balance. So we're not there yet, but we're very much in transition towards this new version of globalization. And I think the US and China should take the lead in this transition and work with each other, work together to find a common path, not just for the two countries, but also for the benefits of global community.
That was Scout One, Vice President with the World Trade Centers Association for Asia Pacific, speaking with my colleague Song Rui Xin. You're listening to World Today. We'll be back after a short break. You're back with World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. Foreign ministers from the BRICS countries are holding a 2-day meeting in New Delhi, India. The meeting brings together diplomats from Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, along with newer member states. China is represented by the country's ambassador to India, Xu Feihong, as Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi remains in Beijing during President Donald Trump's state visit to China. India says the talks are focusing on global and regional challenges and ways to deepen cooperation among BRICS member states. So for more, joining us now on the line is Professor Ana Rosario Melinda-Goy, Director and Vice President for External Affairs with Asian Century Philippines Strategic Studies Institute. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me to your program, and I'm happy to be here. And yes, this is a very interesting topic.
Now, India is the host of this foreign ministers meeting, that's for sure. And India says BRICS could help developing countries more effectively respond to the health and financing challenges they're faced with, as well as high prices for energy, food, and fertilizer. So, do you think BRICS is a stabilizing force for a turbulent world we're situated in nowadays?
That's a very nice question. And I would agree that, yes, definitely, BRICS is a stabilizing force given the very challenging world that we're facing at the moment. But, not necessarily in a traditional way, because when you say stabilizing force, many people would see it and would perceive it in a traditional way. But I think, like, for example, talking about security bloc in that sense, but BRICS, I think, from my perspective, is a stabilizing force because it gives developing countries a stronger collective voice on issues related to human related issues, like, for example, health, security. When you talk about the debts of countries, national debts, food, energy, and fertilizers, and when you talk about prices and transport of fertilizer from one country to the other, and even sanction and financing. So basically, when you talk about BRICS, its value is practical, more policy space, or more policy oriented. I think it talks about more about alternative financing. It talks about supply chain cooperation, and it in many ways it's pushing at the moment for a more fair global governance, especially when you talk about economics and finance. And in terms of, however, of course, there's a weakness to it because it's a new multilateral, not necessarily a body, but a quasi one. And I think it needs to strengthen itself, and it needs also to some extent to have a more consensus of what it's going to focus on amongst so many problems in the world. But one thing that is good about BRICS and the BRICS family and the expanded BRICS is precisely because it's bigger, and it's more diverse, and it's not divided, and it's quite united in many respects in responding to issues that affects the world and affects the developing world. So that's, I think, is the beauty of having BRICS at this time with so many challenging that the world is facing. Yeah.
Both Iran and the United Arab Emirates are full members of the BRICS. And now one thing we cannot deny is that because of the ongoing Iran conflict, new divisions and disagreements have emerged between the UAE and Iran. Do you think BRICS can be an effective platform for the two parties to engage in close consultation and try to resolve their disagreements?
That's also very important question, because if you look at BRICS, you have major countries in there. You have Russia, you have China, you have India, you have South Africa representing different parts of the world and different parts of the continent. But so, yes, I would say yes, potentially speaking, BRICS is useful precisely because it brings rivals into the same diplomatic group or the diplomatic context. As you can see, there are a lot of players. There are major powers in BRICS. And Iran and UAE may not resolve their disagreements inside BRICS because they're both members, but the platform can lower tensions through consultation, economic dialogue, and I think crisis management also. And there are a lot of opportunities to talk within the BRICS family. However, BRICS cannot work like a magic. It's not like magic that they can solve the problems between these two countries. But I think it can facilitate some kind of venue for these two countries to talk and to make dialogue and negotiations. And also in terms of import their regional in terms of blocks, I think BRICS also is an alternative source of, let us say, oil and other oil related products, given that these two countries right now, Iran and UAE, has some kind of a problem. So basically, yes, I would say that it can make a difference when you talk about the conflict and the differences between UAE and Iran maybe as like a convening or a hub of negotiation and communication between the two countries. And I think when you talk about conflict, open and sincere negotiation is very important when you want to resolve it.
How can the BRICS play a constructive role in terms of seeking solutions, especially political and diplomatic solutions to the Iran conflict, in your opinion?
I think when you talk about constructive role that BRICS can play in the Iran war or in the Middle East crisis at the moment, which is still there.
Yeah.
BRICS can push for de-escalation. I think that's one. The escalation of conflict, probably push more for more stability and more sustained ceasefire. And then I think protection of energy routes, because the Strait of Hormuz is under crisis at the moment. It's a very important route when you talk about trade of oil and other related products, even fertilizers. And I think it can call for these countries who are part of the Middle East crisis to respect international humanitarian relief and dialogue. It can also oppose action that worsen food, fuel, and financing pressures on the global south, which is basically the developing economies. But BRICS is more likely to be diplomatic in terms of pressure. I don't think it will push forward for any kind of security related or military related pressure, but it's more diplomatic, I think. And because it's a platform for dialogue, and it can serve also as a mediator with enforcement power, because you have the major powers in there. You have China, you have Russia, and other major powers in there. And also when you talk about contribution of BRICS, I think it's to keep diplomacy open and alive. And especially when you talk about great power politics or rivalry. And I think this makes BRICS relevant, especially when you talk about crises like what is happening now in the Middle East. So I think that's the major importance of BRICS. And I think that can be the role of BRICS in trying to mitigate the problem in Iran right now, or in the conflict in Iran, which is not only, it's actually a very serious problem, because you can see it's Iran as against the United States / Israel. So I think BRICS can offer a platform for dialogue, especially now that actually Trump visited China and Trump is in China. And I think that the issue in Iran will be one of the most important talking points that probably President Xi and President Trump will be discussing, and how they can possibly work together to mitigate it. And China is actually an original member of BRICS. So that's what I can sense, and that's what I can say about this matter.
Thank you very much for joining us. Professor Ana Rosario Malindag-Oy, Director and Vice President for External Affairs, joining us from Asian Century Philippines Strategic Studies Institute. Coming up, in the United States, Mr. Kevin Warsh has won Senate confirmation as the next Federal Reserve chairperson. This is World Today. We'll be back.
As U.S. President Donald Trump visits China, are Beijing and Washington heading toward a tech thaw, or merely pausing before tensions further escalate? From chips and AI to EVs, robotics, and space technology, we explore the key battlegrounds and the areas of cooperation shaping the future of Sino-U.S. relations and the global tech order. Tune in to this week's Chat Lounge, wherever you listen to podcasts, and on CGTN Radio.
You're listening to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. The U.S. Federal Reserve is getting a new leader. The Senate has confirmed Mr. Kevin Warsh as the next chair for the Fed, succeeding Jerome Powell. Warsh was confirmed in a 54 versus 45 vote, the most partisan vote for a Fed chair nominee in the U.S. history. He has pledged to remain independent, saying that he will not base monetary policy on U.S. President Donald Trump's calls for interest rate cuts. So for more on this, my colleague Xu Yawen spoke with Liu Zhiqing, Senior Fellow with the Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies, Renmin University of China.
Professor Liu, Kevin Warsh has been confirmed as Fed chair, and he says he will be an independent actor. But given President Donald Trump's repeated call for interest rate cuts, how will Warsh balance maintaining that independence with the expectations of the administration?
I think we need some more time to see what's really happening to Mr. Warsh, because he has promised to be independent, but whether he can be really independent, it depends on some other external factors, not his own personal direction. And also, he has already described he is an independent actor. Okay, is an actor is just an actor as somebody directed or somebody others to order you to act. So this is a very interesting describing his function as an actor, because as we know, the Federal Reserve plays a very important role in the financial system in the United States. So whether he can be really independent, it depends on his own personality, and whether the Federal Reserve can remain its independent as before, as the Constitution already confirmed such a role. So all partners in this regard should respect this independence of Federal Reserve. This is quite important.
Well, there's a saying that Fed chair's power is often overestimated, only one vote out of 12, and the need to build consensus. So given that, how much influence does Warsh really have over interest rate policy, and what do you see as the biggest constraints on his ability to shape it?
I think that the final decision or the impact on this interest rate always depends on the reality of the economic development. It's not only by some personal idea or personal decision like governors and other, even United States president cannot make any direct instruction on the interest rate. So I think Mr. Warsh has more room and more channels to regulate. His first priority is to maintain his own as independent as possible. This is the most important thing. And of course, the secondary is also he should try to coordinate and cooperate with other governors in this team in order to get a better objective ideas. So can help him to make a good scientific and also very whole society accepted decision. This is very important because all these decisions he made should be met by the market expectation. This is the first priority.
We learned that Powell is staying on as a governor in large part because of a controversial Justice Department probe, which many see as a political pressure. And he's the first former Fed chair since the 1948 to remain on the Fed board. What's your take on that, a former chair remaining alongside his successor?
I think his action has no big problem for the independence of this Federal Reserve. Even he is the first person that remained as the governor after he resigned from this chairman of the Federal Reserve. Because the main conditions and all these efforts that from the Federal Reserve made for the interest cut will be decided by whole group. Powell has its own impact, of course, but whether the impact can overwhelming or can dominate the whole team's decision is something else. So in my opinion, I think that Mr. Powell is somebody very objective and also has his own independence. He is not only a nice fellow to some bodies like a president's order to take an action. His action always made by the group decision and also by the market conditions. This is the two preconditions for his decision. So I hope and I believe that his impact is quite limited as a governor in the team, because the other governors and also himself will be well coordinated. But his remaining in this group is a good sign that for the other governors that to learn, to listen, and to help with each other in order to get a very objective decision for the interest of the American economy.
Professor, Warsh has reportedly planned for years to sharply change the way the Fed operates, including less forward guidance, changes to the balance sheet, and bank regulation. If he pushes those through, how might a more unpredictable Federal Reserve reshape the global financial system? And how should Chinese policymakers prepare for that change?
Yes, this is a good question. As we always say that the U.S. Federal Reserve is important, but it's the first important, it's the first function is the central bank of the America. It's not the central bank of the whole world global market, especially for other countries, or including Chinese partners or Chinese policymakers should take this decision of U.S. Federal Reserve as a reference, but not as the last decision, because all these central banks, especially Chinese central bank, is very independent from the global decision making. So that's why the first line for all these banks, I should say, keeping your independence. This is the first important thing. Not always follow the instruction or the action taken by the Federal Reserve, because the Federal Reserve made any decision is only in the interest of the economic development in the United States, not for the rest of the world. The rest of the world interest, the economy is the second line, the third line. So we never forget that to take more care that for the decision making to safeguard our own interests, and also, of course, we are according to market actual reality, the conditions to make our own decision in the interest of our own country.
And lastly, Professor, we know markets have become highly sensitive to Fed communication over the past decade. If Warsh deliberately reduces forward guidance and embraces more uncertainty, could that restore market discipline, or would it risk creating more policy confusion?
That could be possible. As we know that the U.S. Federal Reserve is always trying to play as the central bank of the global market. So that's why it has a really great impact on the IMF policy, the Bank of the World Bank, and other international banks. But in my opinion, I should say, Mr. Warsh will be the new chair. He should take any new actions according to the latest development of the economy. At the moment, for instance, that our whole economy is facing uncertainties and more challenges. Unexpected problems and difficulties will be facing us, especially for those, the unilateral protectionism will have more negative impact on the economic development. For instance, for the United States, they have the high rate of inflation or high rate of unemployment. This is the main task for Mr. Warsh to keep down or to lower down this inflation in the United States. So I quite relaxing that Mr. Warsh can do a good job, but we need time for him to learn something more and to get more ideas of the real economic conditions and to coordinate his personal actions with the reality.
Liu Zhiqing, Senior Fellow with the Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies, Renmin University of China, speaking with my colleague Xu Yawen. This is World Today. Stay tuned.
Hello, I'm Yin Liang, Kramer Chair Professor of Economics at Willamette University. In a rapidly changing world, staying informed has never been more important. World Today delivers sharp analysis, global perspectives, and the stories behind the headlines. It is your trusted source to understand what's shaping our world. World Today, bringing the world closer.
You're listening to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. Japanese automaker Nissan has remained in the red for the fiscal year ending in March despite shrinking losses. Nissan reported a loss of 533 billion yuan or 3.4 billion US dollars, smaller than the more than 670 billion yen in red ink for the previous fiscal year. Its annual sales fell by 5%. Chief Executive Officer Ivan Espinosa says Nissan is making steady progress and is seeing clear signs regarding a turnaround. Many Japanese automakers have in recent years struggled amid a profound shift to EVs in the auto industry. So joining us now on the line is Dr. Li Lun, Assistant Professor of Economics with Peking University. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So first of all, what do you make of the factors leading to Nissan's failure to make profits over the company's past 2 fiscal years?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, I think the most important reason is that the sales momentum is slowing down. So its annual sales, as you mentioned, have fell about 5%, and its global vehicle sales were just around 3 million units in the fiscal year of 2026. So, when you have a weak sales data, it's very easy to have these downward momentum for the enterprise. And also, I think more importantly, Nissan is one of the victims of a structural change in the auto industry, because in the internal combustion engine era, when we talk about Japanese automakers, they traditionally build a fuel efficient, reliable, but also affordable cars. But there's a trade-off, because when you have high fuel efficiency, usually there's less emphasis on power and performance. When EVs appear, they kind of weaken that trade-off, because a well-designed EV can be energy efficient, can also have strong performance, acceleration, can also be affordable. So this changes the entire expectation of consumers when they buy a car. So this whole structural transformation about the auto industry is also reflected by in Nissan's sales numbers. And finally, I think Nissan also have a high cost structure. So according to its plan, it's targeting a cost savings of 500 billion yen in its new plan, and a reduction of the workforce by 20,000. So analysts are still observing whether that reduction is going to be sufficient to reduce the operating cost of Nissan.
So by the way, do you think for Nissan, the reduced losses in its past fiscal year compared to the previous fiscal year are necessarily a sign for turnaround?
Well, in actual numbers, so basically this year, there's a loss of 500 billion yen. The number is smaller than previous year's 670, but in proportions, they're both around the 5%, range. Even though, it's slowing down a little bit in percentage point, it's not a significant enough turnaround, because a real turnaround, it requires revenue growth as well, not just cutting the cost. And also in terms of the company's own forecast, Nissan says it expects to return to profit margin in the fiscal year through 2027, but the profit margin is very, very narrow, about 20 billion yen. So, which is very small to the scale of recent losses. So even if when it returns to profit, how long can it recover, this loss in the previous 2 years is still unclear.
Against the backdrop of Nissan's financial difficulties, there had been some talks in recent years for Nissan to merge some particular operations with Japanese rival Honda. Why do you think in the end those talks have collapsed?
Yeah, so the main issue was about control. So the original idea was not was more similar to Honda proposing to make Nissan a subsidiary. So this merger or integration is going to change the balance of power between the two countries. And also there has been some disagreement about the depth of the restructuring, because Honda reportedly wanted to make Nissan to make deeper cuts into its jobs and into its factory capacity, but Nissan is apparently very reluctant or hesitant to consider these moves. Also, in terms of the bargaining position, Honda is have a stronger earnings base outside passenger cars. It's reporting, a revenue in motorcycles and also in terms of financial services. So Honda was, performing much more better in financially and operationally. So Nissan was, on the other hand, under heavier pressure. So this is also a trigger of why negotiations could become one-sided and eventually collapse.
So as we look at the challenges faced by Japan's auto industry nowadays in general, what lessons do you think we can learn?
Yeah, so the first lesson, I think, we're looking at a classic case of creative destruction. So the transition to EV is not just replacing a certain type of engine. It's basically reshaping the entire logic or the entire industry. We're talking about updates to batteries, softwares, update to supply chains, changes in infrastructure, and also in terms of consumers' expectations. So what used to work as a business model may not necessarily work in the new era. And also in terms of the transition, the market is moving very fast. The EV transition is not waiting for any legacy automakers. Is not waiting for anyone. For example, in the world, every 1 in 4 cars sold globally was electric. In China, every 1 in 2 cars sold were electric. So the transition is happening at record speed. And Japanese automakers, they need to move faster, but they also need to choose wisely in which direction they want to move. So they need to protect their strength, but they also need to, consider ways to, rebuild their weaknesses to kind of through quality control, through hybrid technology, which they have the comparative advantage, through the reliability in their manufacturing, through the remaining trust in their brand. I think those are the areas they can focus on to kind of come through or overcome this difficulty.
So if we take a look at the oil crisis of the 1970s, in retrospect, that was largely seen as a big opportunity for Japan's auto industry because of, this is something you indicated earlier, it's more economical compared to European cars or American cars in terms of consumption of oil. But nowadays, if we take a look at the Strait of Hormuz crisis, there is another even bigger scale oil crisis across the world. How do you think this is going to generate an impact for Japan's auto industry? Briefly.
Yeah, so I think it does will definitely have an impact. So I think right now simply having fuel efficiency is not enough. So Nissan, one of the reasons that it didn't do so well as Honda is because even though we talk about Japanese cars, we talk about the hybrid technology, Honda does much better in the hybrid technology in terms of fuel efficiency compared with Nissan. So in whatever comparative advantage you have to prepare for the energy shock, you need to double down on that advantage as well.
Thank you very much for joining us. Dr. Li Luan, Assistant Professor of Economics, joining us from Peking University. Unfortunately, that's all the time for this edition of World Today. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on our previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching for World Today. And for further discussion, you can follow us on X at CGTN Radio. I'm Ding Han in Beijing. Thank you so much for listening. Bye for now.